Yay, it's time for Laura. And again, I just wanted to introduce Laura and thank you so much for speaking with us today. And if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you're going to talk about, that would be great. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you again. You all cannot be thanked enough for what you do. I really mean that. You play such a critical role in keeping all of the nonprofits running, especially the ones that are the most outward facing, the ones that help other people. So thank you. And I'll introduce myself again. I'm Laura Cortelyou, and I work for the town of Marana. I am the tourism marketing and film office manager. So I've even added to my title since this slide was created. So my formal training in change management came from my master's degree in organizational development from Fielding Graduate University in California. And Fielding is a pioneer in leadership and change management studies. However, I have a lot of real world experience as well. And prior to studying change management and leadership studies, I had already worked in the nonprofit world in development, in many organizations in the arts and also education. And then I moved into corporate marketing, and I always found myself wanting to change things. All right. So you can see I like to jump in, right? And I like to try to make a difference. It wasn't until I got into the Fielding program for organizational development that I understood change management's a thing, and it's a really interesting thing, right? And it's always with us, and it's something that I hope I can share with you in a real introductory level, but that will give you some hints and ideas of whether you can use these tools to solve some problems you may have, or figure out how to find other tools as well. It's a different vocabulary than what we're used to. I worked with an attorney investigator up until about 7 years ago, 6.5, 7 years ago. And she would be hired by mostly public sector organizations to investigate employee grievances. And she would only get hired when they had the most difficult situation that the human resources department could not understand. No one could really figure out what was going on. They would hire an attorney investigator. And then if she thought that some of the problems that were happening were related to organizational mismanagement, she would hire me. And so I looked at a lot of her cases, and she was primarily working in the public sector as well as higher education. So what I found was that a lot of the time, some of these really terrible problems were simply change management projects gone wrong, or they were mismanaged or miscommunicated. And it snowballed so badly that they ended up having to hire an attorney investigator to investigate the aftermath. So this is really going on. And so I'm really happy to share this with you. I'm going to be giving a very brief overview, and then I want to try to narrow it and get into maybe your own change projects if you have some that you want to talk about. And so we're going to jump right in, and let's go to the next slide. And I'm starting with typical change situations. So there we go. All right. I'll read this in case you can't read the slides yourself, or if you're on the phone. Number 1, the volunteers don't like the new COVID procedures that require them to social distance from others, wear a mask, and conduct all meetings via Zoom. Okay, hopefully we're out of that. We're kind of getting out of this, but some of you are probably still in the middle of it. Number 2, the volunteers don't like the new executive director, who is cold and remote toward them, stopped giving the traditional weekly talks to them, and responds to their suggestions as if they are insults to be ignored. So these could be situations that you can relate to. And if you're on a camera, raise your hand if any of these are relatable. to you? Some of these, okay, you're saying, okay, most of the people are saying, yes, you can relate to these. Okay. It doesn't mean that it's happening in your organization. All right. It's probably happening in somebody else's organization, Iris. You don't have to admit anything. So let's break these down, okay? Because these are really excellent examples. First, so they're both examples of change management projects, but they're so different from each other. The first situation is sudden, unexpected, and unplanned for. That's what we've just experienced. It's imposed from outside of the organization. And that's a critical clue about how the response would be formulated to this. And suddenly the entire environment that we're in changes. Okay. It's also something, what's interesting about what we've been through is that it's kind of been a crash course in change management the past year. And what's unique about this is that everybody can see this happening. All right. And that's not very typical, right? So everybody's affected. Everyone can acknowledge the existence of the need to change. Everyone's impacted by it. But the second situation is probably much more typical, although these aren't classic change projects that you yourself might initiate. Okay, so we'll get to that. All right. But these are other kinds of change management projects. The second project is a situation that comes from within the organization itself. So something changes in the organization, and it has unexpected and unintended consequences. No one knew what would happen when a new executive director came on board. Okay, so that is almost like a change project within a change project. You bring in new leadership, and it might be understood that this new leader is going to do certain things, but no one knows that they have different habits until they start the job. Nobody knows that they're going to communicate differently to the volunteers until they start their job. So now you have multiple things going on. Also, this is only going to impact certain people in an organization and not everybody. So not everybody will see what's going on. Okay, so now are you in the middle of it? Yes, you are. So now you have to figure out what needs to happen to get this situation on track, or what am I supposed to communicate to our volunteers about why the new executive director doesn't really want to talk to them as much as the old one did. Okay, so that's kind of these are typical situations that you may not think of as being change projects, but they're both triggered by things changing. So what I wanted to do was do a typical, so in change management, you want to start with yourself and you need to figure out where you are, okay, in this situation. So if everybody would write down 3 words, just 3 words for each of these 2 situations that we have on the slide, of how do those situations make you feel? 3 words for the first one, 3 words for the second one. Just take a moment and I'll give you like 1 minute. Don't overthink. And I'll do the same thing. Okay. Let's try unmuting ourselves. And I would really like to hear your words for the first situation. What were the 3 words? And Gina, why don't you start? I'm going to volunteer you.
My first word was, in a way, I felt helpless.
Okay,
All 3 words? I'm sorry.
go ahead, all three.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put frustrated, helpless, and then I put safety.
Totally. Okay, who else wants to go? I'm as many people as can go, please go. Let's just hear your words. Jump
Okay,
in.
I'll go.
Okay.
For the first one, I put forced, uncontrollable, and random. Do you
Wow.
want the second one now, or you just want the
We'll
first
do
one?
the first one, then we'll go to the second, okay? Because let's just see if there's any difference between the two. I'm curious. I don't know what you're going to say, but that's a very powerful words. Thank you, Linda. Who else? Come on, let's go. Let's do it.
I said for the first, dynamic, stressed, and energized.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
The first I had again, tired and frustrated.
Wow. A lot of frustration, huh? Yeah.
I had uncomfortable, stuck, and temporary.
Mm-hmm.
There was another one in the chat. Someone said frustrated, helpless, and understanding.
Uh-huh. Wow. These are good. So far, these are okay. Unsure, scared, and done is from Sarah. Anybody else?
Tired, defensive, and frustrated.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or are we done? Okay, go. If somebody wants to go. Okay, frustrated, overwhelmed, and exhausted from Carrie Dean. Thank you for sharing. Let's do the second one. It's a little bit different, but maybe not. What were people's words for the second situation? Go ahead.
Anticipated, controllable, and fixable.
Very good.
Mine were frustrated, exacting, and immediate action.
It sounds like some of you are change agents, natural born change agent, which you are because you're in nonprofits and you are coordinating volunteers who you're deploying to make change. So you have a great attitude. Anybody else? How about hard words for the second situation?
I put feedback, upset, and unfair.
Great. That's great.
I said annoyed and embarrassed. And why?
Mm-hmm.
My words were very different for this than for the first. And maybe it was because I was tired of the first sort of answers. I had listen, engage, and understanding.
Wow. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And some other words were dialogue, listen, resolution, disheartening, I think change, uncomfortable, unknown, embarrassed, get to work, connect.
Yeah. These are really great. So you're all really advanced at this. So I'm going to show you some things that maybe you already know. And we'll just keep going. Let's go to the next slide. And I just want to say at this point, so you are situated in these situations, right? When things are changing and you sound very much empowered already, and that you feel empowered to be part of the process and to shape the process of change. So that's really excellent. You also probably are very good at taking other people's perspectives, since you're working with so many different people as volunteers who have different learning styles, different communication styles. So you may already be switching around how you communicate to adjust to people. And that's one of the essential things in change management is to figure out what, if it's a simple, obvious thing, then an organization can pull together, everybody can get it done. It's when things are a little bit more difficult and thorny that you want to pull back and maybe start to look at different frameworks for how to frame what's happening. And so this is for when this is a little more advanced, and I'm going to show you more of the social psychology models for looking at change. So we're going to go way out. We're going to zoom way out because you all really understand well what it feels like when change is up close and personal, and how you work through that process. Okay. But sometimes it's not always that. So we're going to, and I put in this quote here because Kurt Lewin and this field of change management, this is not a new thing at all. This has been evolving since the 1940s at least. And it really grew up along the field of social psychology, the study of organizational behavior, and depth psychology. Depth psychology is knowledge of the self and how to understand yourself. So the more you understand where you are in knowing about change that's happening, or it's your project and you're launching it, so you are the change manager, or you're hearing about it for the first time, and is this change you're comfortable with or change that you yourself are not comfortable with? Then you can approach, well, what is my role in making this happen? Okay, or how can I shape this for others to make it happen and get them on board with this project that we're going to all co-create? So next slide, please. So we're looking at this. This is a very old model here that is showing how to look at change from these completely different fields. Now, some of you may be related to behavioral change, as in social work and treatment programs. And there are models, many models, as you know, such as a 12-step program in alcohol treatment, that are talking about, in similar ways, managing change and moving people through a cycle of change. So be careful. If you want to go looking for organizational change models, there are all kinds of them out there. So you can find those. They are totally different from behavioral treatment, but they can look similar and use some of the same words. So that's why I picked this slide to show you, because at the organizational level, and this could be within your organization, it could be your organization in its own ecosystem of the kind of services that you provide, that others provide as well. How is your field changing? And it can be the world at large. How is the world changing? And how does your organization now fit in? Okay, so these are bigger models to look at a wider, more macro view. So the first square on the top left is showing us evolution that is happening to the whole entire world at a time, like your entire population. This is the kind of situation we went through. This is showing how, this is the simple model of Darwinian evolution. You have something happen, you have reactions and adaptation, selection, and then retention, where some members of the population don't make it. Okay, this is like brutal evolutionary change. That would be the COVID crisis in a way, but at the individual level, we're not looking at that level. We're looking at organizations. Some had to adapt rapidly, and some were able to adapt, and some whole entire sectors, such as restaurants, were really hit harder than many others, and some were not able to adapt. Let's just say restaurant sector alone, if we look at that one, some were able to quickly adapt, and then some were not, and so they've closed. But they may relaunch as in a different form. Okay, but that's this basic level. That's basic change. The top right is so incredible. When I saw this, I realized, oh, this is the other, so with COVID going on, that's one change project. And then guess, what we're also going through in the middle of that is we're going through dialectical change, where we have groups who are challenging status quo, and rightfully so, calls for racial equity, diversity, social justice, and Me Too. All of these things are happening at the same time that COVID is happening. So we've been in this massive reorganization of thinking for the last year. And this happens within organizations as well, where you have different groups who are clashing. It could be your board members and say, we want to go in this direction. No, we want to go in this other direction. What's our core mission? Are we meeting? Are we fulfilling our mission? You may have volunteers who are pulling apart and saying, hey, we want to do things differently. Okay, but then another group, the other group, let's say it's divided equally, is saying we don't want to change. And then we also have pressure from outside to change by other groups, who are saying we're not diverse enough. When is this ever going to change? So we get to look at ourselves and contemplate, thoughtful, planned out evolution and change. That's a luxury, as opposed to having probably change thrust upon us, right? When from the outside, such as COVID, that was a really difficult beginning to COVID. And then we did adapt, generally we adapted to it. The bottom left is another way of looking at change. And this is change across the lifespan. And we will look at this in a later slide as organizational life cycle analysis as well. Humans have a life cycle. We have to learn how to walk, and then, read and, be a productive member of society and so forth. And so we have a whole lifespan, right? There's a field that looks at organizations and their lifespan, and how organizations have very specific characteristics at different stages of a lifespan. So that's what that's looking at. And the last one is the kind of change where teleological change, where you are in a healthy organization and all of a sudden someone says, I think we can do something better. Or you are the change agent and you say one day, hey, why don't we? And then you have some incredible idea. Or what if we, and you have an idea. This is self-directed change, where an organization can undertake its own improvement. Okay, so those are different ways of looking at what's happening. So let's go to, all right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is going back to the cycle. So I am going to get to the perfect model. If you simply want to create a change project, and I'm sure many of you have done this, there's a model, and there's many models for all the different steps that if you follow every one of these steps and you get stuck at any point, then you can still save this project and make sure that it happens. But if you check off the list and go around the cycle, then you will have the highest chance of being successful for your project. This is, before we get to that slide though, where are you in the change cycle and the change process? What's your personal level of comfort with change? And the answer to that for pretty much is it depends on the change for most of us, but know that other people may not be comfortable with change at all of any kind. Okay, there are just some people. So there's a whole spectrum of people's who are comfortable with change versus resistance to change, no matter what it is. They're always going to say no. All right. Your situation in terms of what your function is. So you're always interfacing with volunteers. And so you have a function in your organization. If there's something changing, you have to kind of sell that idea, don't you? So that's you. And you may want to change some things about the organization. And so know that the different parts of an organization are involved in change management differently. So one example of this would be that if, let's say, you want to incentivize volunteers and you want to have some kind of reward system, that might involve your finance department. Now you're dealing with another part of the organization. Now, depending on how big or large your organization is, that finance department may have a lot of different controls and systems in place. Maybe they don't like to change their systems, or maybe you need to find out what they need from you to be able to implement something that seems simple. But you hit upon things you don't know are going on in other parts of the organization if your organization is a certain size when you start to do a change project. So you want to keep in mind, what are all the different parts of the organization that might be affected, or maybe you want to bring them in to help make change happen. Okay, and maybe there's a whole lot of help that is out there in your organization that you don't think about. You think it's just you in your own department or area, but you may have other people who want to help you. You also have your own culture. So I would imagine that volunteer culture, volunteer management culture, has its certain kind of culture. And other parts within an organization are going to have a completely different. You have the development office culture, marketing culture, cost controls, the bookkeeping, accounting department culture. And so you have different cultures inside of an organization. And then you have different cultures between organizations that maybe you partner with, right? So we all notice that. So we know about organizational culture, but cultures are very interesting. And we're going to look at a little bit of how to kind of look at culture too, as something that's plays a very active role in how an organization reacts to change. So when you are realizing all of these things are going on in an organization, then you have, okay, so where are the volunteers? Where are they at in terms of their resistance or acceptance of change? What are we asking them to do? How does the change affect what they do? And so forth. So it gets interesting, and you all have a lot of complexity in what you're doing. Nonprofits typically have not been studied for change management the way that corporations have been, because corporations are trying to always optimize their profits, maximize their profits. And that is where most change management study has been performed, and where consulting is performed is in corporations. The nonprofit world is very different. And so you have some big challenges in your world that's why you are always changing everything all the time, because you are your own change management consultants, I imagine. So let's look at what does a very typical model on the next slide, please. This is so typical. This is the classic model. So I called it the just do it. So assuming you have no challenges at all or barriers, and you come up with an idea that you want to implement, or someone comes to you and they say, hey, what if we, and then you have this idea. So at the top of this cycle, and there are many others, this is just one, but this is the classic one by John Cotter. You create a sense of urgency. That's how you get on people's radar in your organization. And your organizations are doing this all the time because you are the nonprofit world. So your nonprofit is creating a sense of urgency for why people need to support the food bank, for example. That's a great one. So you create a sense of urgency. This many people are going to go hungry today in Tucson if we don't have your help. All right. So you're all changing the world. So you probably know all of this, like, like the back of your hand, but I'm introducing this as how it also works within your organization. You create a sense of urgency. You build a coalition. So in your organization, who's the yes person? Who's the person who says, yes, let's do that? Let's try it out. And so you go to your friendlies, identify the friendlies. Who's going to love your idea? All right. And that's your person who you want to partner with and build, and then kind of spread out from there. And then you say, well, who else do you think would be into this? Okay, yeah, let's get so-and-so. Well, let's do this. And you sort of build excitement with the people who understand what it is you want to do first. When you form a strategic vision, what this doesn't talk about in this model is that at this point, what that also means is you want to find out who's going to be the most resistant in your organization. Who is the no person? And how can we plan for that? You want to plan for resistance to change. You just know that there's going to be somebody who's going to say, oh, no, we can't do this. And then you figure out, okay, how can we work with that person? Or is there somebody who can talk to them and get them on board? Or you go around them and you try to build more of a coalition and hope that they come along. All right. You enlist a volunteer army. You already have volunteer armies, but maybe this isn't involving your army of volunteers. So that's building the coalition further within your organization. You talk it up. You are the change leader, or you work with other change leaders together and you co-create this idea. And then you talk about your vision also has to include, how can you remove barriers to making this change happen? And, those can be really specific things, depending on what it is you're trying to change. It could be a form of an incentive so that you can now tap into young adults who are the hardest people to bring in as volunteers because you're competing with their jobs and they need to work for money. You're going to try to do something. It has to be difficult or else it's not a big change program. Okay, this is like a big change program. This is where you're trying to do something major. And so you need to figure out what barriers need to be removed. Are there policies? Is it the HR department? Do they need to get involved and help you understand maybe it's safety and practices? There are lots of different things. This is where understanding how the different parts of the organization work. What do we need to do to make something happen? And then this is such a classic, this is volunteer, I'm sure, practice. You generate short-term wins. You set people up for success. And then you celebrate, we did it. Okay, we hit our first milestone. And you let people know that you appreciate that they are doing this. But we're talking about real change here. It isn't like a one-off. So you want people to change their behaviors, their habits, their thinking, whatever it is, it's going to relate to all of those things. And so you want to sustain these new habits. And so you sustain, and this has acceleration because this is a goal-oriented thing. I forgot to mention that. Do you notice that this is a goal, right? So it's not endless process. This is toward a goal, okay? So many nonprofits are about process, okay? And that's another thing to note is that if you need to make a change management project happen, you need to set a goal, all right? So when we started to create a sense of urgency at the very beginning, that was toward a goal, okay? So now we're sustaining and accelerating these behaviors, and then we're instituting the change. And we want it to become a new, ongoing, new behavior or practice or department or a new something big, okay? And you may have to repeat this cycle a few times. You may get stuck at a certain point and say, why couldn't we sustain this? everybody started doing it and they got all excited because they just love the idea of doing something different, but we couldn't sustain it. Okay, so you need to figure out how can we, what is it, how are we losing enthusiasm for this? You know, and you need to reiterate our goal because we forgot our goal. So the first rule is to over communicate by, you know, more than 100 times what the goal is of the new project that you're trying to make happen. And so if you lose steam, keep communicating. You know, you can't communicate too much when it comes to change management. So that's really like the classic cycle of change. And again, it's more than a campaign. It's more than a marketing campaign. A marketing campaign is a marketing campaign. This is organizational change. Okay, so this is bigger than that. You may draw from this to do smaller projects, and that's fabulous. If you need to do some real major work though, this is the beginning. This is just the beginning. So we're going to look at sometimes, no matter how perfectly each of these steps is executed and the communication is spectacular and you get the marketing department involved in creating a new logo to sell this new mission or this new program, and everybody's working together and the volunteers are on board. And then something doesn't, I mean, those would all, I don't know how you would be successful if you can get all, you know, everybody moving in the same direction. That's what we're trying to do. However, just to show you that even the best change manager and the best project, you can sometimes hit some different kinds of challenges. And we're going to go to the next slide. And this is one way to analyze, like, what happened, or why can't we fulfill our mission? We have all the best people in the world, but somehow we can't get this done. Okay, what's happening? There's certain typical challenges that organizations struggle with, and this is the life cycle analysis. What if you can't just do it? What if you're in an organization where there isn't a lot of energy? Okay, and I see this a lot, and this is such a challenge in nonprofits. I've worked in nonprofits that had energy, and I've worked in nonprofits that did not have energy. And what's the difference? Well, this is one way of looking at it. It's not perfect, but it's a different way to take it away from your own personal experience. This is the organization life cycle stage. And this is so old. This is from the 1970s. I love this because these are raster graphics that are showing this chart. And it still works. I like this a lot because off the bat, you can walk into an office space and you can tell, is it humming? You know, is there energy? Is stuff happening? Or is it like really quiet? Like really, really, really quiet. And so you might go, oh, okay, we're looking at the life cycle here. It's not anybody's fault. That's just overall take the pulse of the organization. It's nobody's fault. It's just here's the truth. So this is looking at organizations as if they are a living organism. And you have a startup organization, that's the far left side of this curve, of this bell curve. And those are the go-go years. And you can have a nonprofit that's brand new and meeting a newly identified need in the world, and everybody's so fired up and everybody's on fire, you know. And then it goes into, it matures, and maybe everybody's working out of their houses for this young startup, and then they finally get an office space and everybody's excited, and then they hit their prime when they've got to like so many employees. There's no magic number. It could be any number for that particular organization, and they're just humming along and everything is working. Okay, that's where they're at in their life stage. Okay, and then you get to the prime, the late prime, and things are still working, and things can work for a long time, and things can work forever. Okay, because the nonprofit world is different from corporate. So that's what I wanted to make sure you understand. This is developed for corporations. Okay, I don't think there's one specific to the nonprofit world. So just know that this is out there, and if it fits, use it. All right, but it's not ideal for the nonprofit world. Because why? Because the nonprofits can reinvent themselves. You can reinvent yourself with a new board, new donors, new missions, things in the outside world change. And now you can say, oh, we can adapt. We can do that too. And then you get new donors as a result. You can do a lot of different things to reify your organization. And corporations can't necessarily be nimble, and they have different motives. Everything is toward profit seeking. And so it's different. Okay. But so you can go on forever. By the same token, nonprofits can be zombies forever. Okay. So you can have a zombie nonprofit where donors just throw money at it. And then people kind of get into this late prime. So look at what happens. So you have the aristocracy where people are very ensconced in their roles and overly formal and a bit stiff. That's the aristocracy phase. Maybe some nonprofits can do that forever. Maybe they've always been there. Okay. Maybe that's how they were founded. All right. So the recrimination stage is terrible. It's always everybody's fault. Everybody fights with each other. Everybody's in conflict. And it's not the good kind of conflict that we saw earlier, where you have a group that's legitimately challenging and says, we need to change. And we can say why. We have really good reasons why we need to change. It's for the health of the organization. This is toxic recriminations where it's always somebody's fault. Everybody's afraid of making a mistake and getting called out. You have bureaucracy when there's just endless process. There's just nothing but process. So I was in an organization, it was a for-profit organization, where I would have 8 hours of meetings a day. And then I'd have 8 hours of work to do after that, right? Because every meeting would create an hour's worth of work. And it was so bureaucratic. And it happened that I was going through the fielding program, working on my master's degree, so I could use my organization in all of my class case studies. And I realized, and so everybody got to hear about my crazy organization. And what I came to the realization was, without anybody telling me in the organization, was, okay, I'm in a dying organization, and oh my gosh, I think they're selling my division. And sure enough, it turns out I've figured it all out, that they were getting ready. I was working in academic history publishing, and it was the last independently owned academic history publishing company in higher education, academic history in higher ed. And so they were looking to sell off the academic division. I was the head of marketing for the academic division, and all they would ever do was say no to me. All I ever heard was no. And it was a very, let's just say, a very stressful environment. And what they wanted to do was sell my division, that was this incredibly profitable product, to completely reinvent this company to be in the secondary schools market and get out. They wanted to exit higher education entirely. So I realized things were wrong. And by working through these models, I figured out why they were wrong, because it didn't make sense that a corporation would act this way unless something else was going on. That was a different kind of profit seeking than from profit seeking from within, but they were shopping around this division. So after bureaucracy, it has death. And you're never going to find an organizational consultant in the world who's going to come into your organization and say, oh my God, let's just have a funeral. They're not going to say that, because who's going to write them a check after that, right? So, but don't feel bad, because organizations have the intelligence. If they have the intelligence, they may be able to reinvent themselves. So they can be in the death spiral, but sometimes, that's it. It's time to get off, get off that train and go to a different organization. There's really nothing anyone can do, but if there's a will, then it can be reinvented. So these are things that really happen. And if you wanted to delve into this kind of literature, look at organization life cycle and like search, you can Google search this and just find the typical challenges at each one of these stages. There are typical challenges And, you know, the parts that are easy about each stage and the parts that are incredibly typical challenges that every organization goes through at these stages. But nonprofits, as I mentioned, they can be at any of these stages, but they often get caught in some kind of like zombie stage. So that's a tough one. And that's when you might want to say, it's time to look at changing some things, you know, and then you start that change project. You have a big goal. You know, we're going to go from serving this many people to growing regionally. We're going to grow statewide, or we're going to reach new audiences that we've always underserved populations. We've always talked about reaching, but let's really do it this time and not just talk about it. So that's like, you can use a change project as an intervention in some of these later life cycle changes. If you're in the, you know, the ramp up to the prime life cycle stage, you don't have time to start new projects. Everything is changing all the time. It's just always, you're already changing. So let's go to the next slide. And these are garden variety problems. Okay. So we're not going to talk about the organization and its as a unit of analysis. Now we're just talking about humans and human behavior as the unit of analysis here. Silos. We're all in silos, whether we realize it or not. Many of us are in bigger, you know, silos than others. And it just, it's always a challenge we all need to overcome all the time. We're very specialized within organizations. We have silos. So people stay with their department. They don't talk to other departments very much. They have their own way of thinking. And they're like, why are those people so weird? Okay, so that's a silo. If you find people saying that in your organization, that means it's probably pretty siloed. You know, the classic organization that's like the most siloed that you can find would be academia. You know, nobody gets along. You know, everybody's, you know, like they don't like each other. They don't like each other within their department, but the departments don't like each other generally. I'll just say that. I'm not, you know, you're not supposed to make these kinds of broad statements, but I will, because I used to market to the academic history market. And I love librarians. Librarians are the best. They are not that way. They are the information gatherers. So they are like the volunteer managers of the world. Okay, librarians. So communication is always classic. You understand that. Personality conflicts. Sometimes it really goes back to personality. We forget that. We forget really simple things. Sometimes conflicts, when trying to manage change, can simply go back to, like, we have different ways of talking about this, or we have different ideas about what's right and wrong. And it can result in a lack of feedback. It can result in lack of empowerment. Some people don't trust people to have a lot of leeway, and it's like personality. So how do you work through that? That's something to be aware of. And last, like organizational leadership, that can cause every one of these problems. All right. It can show up with lack of rewards, so that people don't feel appreciated. And that's yourself, because your job is to make your volunteers feel appreciated, but maybe you don't feel appreciated. Okay. So that's organizational leadership. Poor onboarding. Like, is your organization a revolving door where there's people coming in so quickly and leaving so quickly that no one's really steeped in what your culture is? You know, and so it's hard to work with some of the people in your organization because they just don't know how you do things. So maybe, you know, that's a problem. Board members. A lot of boards have turnover constantly. And how do you bring on new board members? That involves training and helping them to understand not just what you do, not just what's written down under your mission statement, but how you do it, how you perform your culture. Like, we perform our culture as being friendly and open And we like feedback. Okay, so a board member needs to know that. So that if somebody comes up to them and gives them feedback, they don't go, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, they'll like, oh, thank you. You're performing our culture. I get it. You know, so these are soft things that happen in organizations that people might forget about. And your organizational leaders need to be reminded. We're not just structure, we're culture. Okay, you have structure and culture. Lack of training in organizations, I see this fortunately where the town of Marana has always been a learning culture. And so a learning culture organization is where you are always pushing people out. Like you have to budget for your educational training every year here. You have to. And it's like, what a luxury, because I've been in organizations where I was in for years where they're like, no, you can't do that. Well, you have to tell me what the ROI is. And it's just, there's the ROI for education is priceless. Okay. So that's a cultural thing as well. So being in a learning culture values continual improvement. Okay. And that goes with change. If you're continually improving, you are continually changing, and they're not afraid of ideas. So yes, you go to that conference and come back with some ideas. Maybe people are like, oh, wow, we're so glad we sent you to that conference. You came back with a couple of really great ideas. That's what you want to hear. All right. So what are the solutions? Let's go to the next slide. The solutions to garden variety problems are garden variety solutions. Okay. So when you have silos, here's some quick and dirty. These are just really quick things because I want to leave you with some ideas. You have intergroup meetings. You just have to sit down more with the different departments so that you can get out of your silos. Everybody can get out of their silos. You have more communication. You be the change, okay? So silos are one of the nicer problems to have because you can just start talking to people and say, hey, let's have an interdepartmental thing. Okay, you know, and that's pretty easy to do. When you need to hand off projects and those aren't happening very well, then find mentors in the organization that can help people who are struggling. You know, and that could be a formal thing where you're going to start an internal mentor program because you have new staff all the time, or you have new board members all the time, whatever that may be. Just create a new group, you know, identify the people who have the kinds of skills that you value and say, we want you guys to share your knowledge. You can tap your own organization so much more for knowledge. How about, and also the other thing that everybody is facing right now is having to do more with less. Everybody is having to do more, provide more services with fewer volunteers and fewer resources than ever. This has happened before. This is cyclical. It has to do with our economy, and it's happened before. It happened in the early 90s. It happened, you know, around the dot-com bubble. It happens. It's part of a cycle, and you need to all work together to help each other. When you have more to do, and you might say, I don't have time for a meeting. I don't have time to meet with my peers and talk about how little time we have. So it's a conundrum, but yes, you must carve out time to help each other and listen to each other because you're all human. You're not parts of a machine. So you need to remember that because you're going to have enormous pressure to do more with less. We know that's coming. Okay. Gravity hasn't really taken effect. So we need to work together. Personality conflicts. This one is the funnest one to solve because you can study up on personality types and types in the workplace. And, you know, if you have a difficult person, how do you resolve conflicts? Is this really a verbal thing that you can change by changing your words? Is it a personality thing that you can just approach from a completely different way? So sometimes we need to do a little homework. We may not want to. It can help though. And organizational leadership problems. You can coach up. So you can take these things like, you know, there are words to use. We're falling behind. I'm concerned. that we aren't being as effective as we could be. I'm concerned that something's going to fall through the cracks. I'm concerned that we're not improving our services. Therefore, we need these things. And so you're coaching up to the executive director. And I'm sure you do this as well. It's different though than providing feedback. So there's feedback, but coaching up is going to be more about these core issues, core, serious, ongoing issues that are dragging everybody down. That's not feedback, okay? This is coaching up, where you have to get on the radar of influencers, okay? And maybe the influencers can talk to the executive director about it, or maybe there's somebody in between who can take these concerns up. But the answer is usually going to be some new organizational changes. Those are the kinds of issues I'm talking about. So not just feedback, like, oh, if we did this, it would help, blah, blah. That's just a quick fix. But these are like things that can take root and affect your morale and change your culture and affect your ability to deliver your services and what it is that you are tasked with doing. So that is a very quick introduction to some key concepts in change management. We'll go to the last slide. And these are some of the top three books that I would recommend if you recognize yourself in this role, or if this is your personality, or if this is your organization. You can read these books and gain a whole lot of perspective on how to approach changing things and being more effective in voicing the need for change, getting things changed. It's not, it takes a little bit of discipline and planning. And, but I have faith that most organizations are capable of successfully changing themselves in the right hands. So we can stay on this slide. I think maybe there's one more. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So does anybody want to talk about any sort of change projects that they have, or anything of this nature that they want to hear how you might frame this? Or did you get stuck somewhere and like, what's going on? Can we help you? Like, who would like to share something? Go ahead, please, Alex.
So this one is kind of maybe a little multifaceted, but my kind of question is, what are some reflective tools, or tools in general, to kind of use daily, weekly, monthly, to note kind of where you're at in change processes? Specifically, the context or scenario I'm in is like my boss left for grad school, so my boss got promoted, I got promoted, and then another person is coming in, so I have a new boss kind of in a new position, and I'm also about to be a boss to somebody else, which I've never really done before, or at least not in this kind of like professional capacity. So I would think it would be helpful for me as I enter this stage, and probably for lots of people, to just like reflect on how they're handling change and like, I don't know, does that make any sense?
Absolutely. These are really big changes. So that's like a big reorganization happening all at once. So I want to ask you, do you feel as though your boss who left did a good handoff to you of things that you need to know? Because it sounds as though that person isn't going to be able to hand off to the incoming boss.
Right. So yeah, she handed off pretty well to my boss, because we were all still like a team.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, there's continuity, thankfully. But enough.
Okay. So it sounds as though your area has grown because you're getting an employee
Hmm.
that you are now the boss of. So that's
Hmm.
congratulations. So you're growing. So you're
Hmm.
now, so your department, where would you say, I'm not going to tell you, you have to tell me, where would you say your department is in the life cycle model? An organization.
Hmm. I think we're in, yeah, I think we're in go-go phase, honestly.
Yeah.
Was that what it was, go-go? Like just above infant and below prime?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's-
think that's where we're at for a couple of reasons that I could get into if you wanted, but that's where I think we're at.
So that's almost like having to drink from a fire hose. Is that a
Yeah.
little bit like where you're at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, definitely.
Okay. So what you want to do, you're in a completely different situation than most organizations. You have the challenges everybody else envies. And it sounds like probably, I would love to hear what other people would recommend to Alex. It sounds like you want to find some probably just basic management training that's really useful and applicable for you in your new role. You can take online training and read books and ask mentors in your organization, people who you admire. So when you say reflective tools, maybe a person is the best reflective tool. Maybe finding somebody who can say, and it could be someone inside your organization or somebody outside, and just check in. Because one of the things, coaching is another aspect of organizational development. So coaching is very much one-on-one, and coaching is what executives undertake for continual self-improvement. We always need that. We can always benefit from that. We can always help each other with that. You don't have to be at any stage in your career to help other people. It's about listening and feeling and reacting appropriately. And sometimes you'll come up with something and be like, gosh, that went wrong. What happened? And try it out on somebody in your organization. What did you do when this happened? People love to be asked. We don't draw upon each other enough as resources. And there's certain managerial challenges that will come up for managers, no matter what part of an organization you're in. So that's those are some organizational development solutions. And I can see, trying to think of what books, I don't know. Let me think about what books I might recommend for somebody in your situation. And you feel like you don't know anything, but you probably know all this. You have all the skills, you have all the things you need. So, but just talk to people. It'll save you time.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. And that's how I process best, honestly, is through conversation with others. So yeah.
Good.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Again, we need to work together better. All of us, everybody, we all need to work together. During the COVID crisis, we I think most people developed we're in this together attitude. It'd be nice to bring that forward. That's probably the only thing we want to bring forward, right? Anybody else have something? A good change, like something wicked, like a wicked change problem? There's a whole literature on wicked problems that are not easy. You can go through all the different models, all the different cycles, all again and again and again, and they're wicked. So they are really hard to untie, these knots. Just know that if that's you, search on those Google terms and you will find books that you can read that have really practical case studies, everyday solutions. So I'll give my change management project unless somebody wants to have something more interesting. Mine's kind of boring. No, but you want to hear mine. Okay. Back in like, I think it was November, I was suddenly bored out of my mind. And I was like, what can I do? I want to do a really cool project. I need something interesting. And lo and behold, the visitor center announces suddenly that we're moving it from the old location to the present new location in Marana, and they need new signage. And I was like, oh, fun. I can't wait. I get to go drive around. I'm gonna figure out like what signage we're gonna have for the visitor center. It sounded like a super easy project that you could get done in an hour. Okay. And I may have wrapped it up today. Today, actually, I might have finally gotten the sign program done. So what happened was I started to drive around and I realized I wanted to see what signs already existed, metal signs existed pointing to our old visitor center that would be now incorrect, pointing to the wrong place. So I started to do a windshield survey where I'm driving around in my car taking photos through my windshield of all of these signs. And I realized, holy cow, we have about 80 million signs and they're all really unattractive. And they're like ugly green metal, not very attractive. And now this part of Marina where the municipal complex is really densifying and changing. So we're in a continual development site now where we're getting all kinds of new restaurants and all kinds of amenities up here. And now these signs are clutter, and we had the cemetery on like 9 signs. And it was like, is this a very welcoming thing? Do we need to have 9 cemetery signs? I don't think that's proper. So I suddenly realized we need a whole new program. Well, I ran into one of my favorite people who's our Parks and Rec superintendent, and I told him about this idea. So I started shopping around my idea. I'm going to do a change management project. We're going to get a whole new sign program here, and we're going to redesign the signs, make them look pretty. And he's like, oh my gosh, we could reuse the brand new sign template that we created for, our developer signs. That was a whole other different thing. We could reuse that. It looks nice. Engineering already proved it. So we have no problems working through engineering specs, which you don't want to understand those. They're really difficult. It's like a phone book full of specs for signs that you have to know. So what happened was we started to design this program, and I ran into some resistance, not from engineering, from our streets division. I had no idea that the streets division had rejected the sign program that engineering had approved for private developers in Marana because they thought the signs, it turned out, well, I won't give you the answer. Okay, I'm going to just describe what happened. They didn't like the signs at all. And I kept working with them, and we had to work through many rounds of design where we're designing them, color coding them, making them look pretty, putting the different destinations on, figuring out where they go. This is going to be, and it had to be called a wayfinding program. You can't call it signs because it's different. It's a wayfinding program. So I had to learn a whole new vocabulary because I'm working with engineering and streets. Finally, I get this, I'm talking to our streets division, and he says, yeah, these aren't going to work. And it's like, what? This is like a month ago. And it was like, but we've like rendered, we have these designed, our graphic designer did beautiful renderings. Everybody's signed off on it. What's happening? What's going on? He says, I stay calm. I was like, well, what do you think? He's like, these are flimsy signs. They're not going to work. I immediately called up the sign fabrication company, and I said, are these flimsy? Are they flimsy signs? Oh no, we use sheet metal. We cut it to spec. It's going to last forever. And they're safer than the old metal signs that we currently have. So all I had to do is get them together in the same room. And our streets division hears directly from the sign fabricators. Yes, we use this inch thick sheet metal. It's made out of this fabric and, like steel, aluminum, whatever it is that they use that will last forever. And what had happened was when engineering approved the same signs for private developers, the streets division said, we don't like these signs and we don't want to have anything to do with it. So they never understood what the signs were made out of and that they were made to last. They thought they were just going to blow over in the first windstorm. So they did not understand. And further, what we found out when they sat down with the sign fabricator was they had created a decorative sleeve around the pillars that anchor the signs into the ground. And the decorative sleeve appeared to be made out of very flimsy material, but it was surrounding 100% steel that you could make, skyscrapers out of. So when all of this finally came out, everybody was like, okay, this is great. We're totally fine. Everything's fine here. And by the way, we have a couple of improvements for the signs and, we think this can help. And if we put this over here, then it's all better. And we're like, gosh, thank you guys. This is great. So we just made the final edits today and it's going to go to the sign fabricator pretty soon. But that was an example. I know, thanks. I mean, it's like I am like the classic even though I know all of these steps to follow, the steps, but you don't know what you're going to run it. You don't know what just happened. Okay, so that was my experience. Was I didn't know they just had this interaction between two different departments. I don't interact with either one. I don't know what they just had going on, and that one got upset. They didn't think the signs were good enough, but they weren't brought into the process. And then I come along, and like here I am with the same signs, and they're just like, whoa, 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 so. That is often the case, and it just takes patience. You have to use patience and sometimes really getting the right people into the room at the same time. And how do you know who the right people are? Sometimes that in itself is the whole essence of the solution, is like, who are the right people to get into the room? And I just realized when I heard the streets guy express real concern, because he's really trying to do the best job that he can. I don't think these signs are going to be safe. I think they're going to be flimsy and cheap. And it was like, oh my gosh, I don't want flimsy, cheap signs either. I want us to have the best signs ever that will last forever. So let's get the sign people here right away and scrutinize them. And they better answer for their signs. They better give us the right answers or we are not going to them. So anyway, I was on their side. Okay, because we're all in this together. And if they have concerns, I have concerns. So that was how I worked with that. Okay, so you just never know. But I hope that this has given you some ideas. Thank you so much for all of your time, for listening. And please feel free. The last slide has my contact information. You may, text me or email or call me on my cell phone. If you ever have an organizational challenge that you want to run by someone who doesn't know your organization, doesn't know anybody on your board, you can things can get very tense when you have a problem and you just don't know who to go to. And you start to wonder if you're the only person out there with this problem or how to solve it. So I appreciate all that you do and all of these incredible challenges. You're the heroes. So thank you again for everything that you do.
Thank you, Laura. This reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Service Enterprise Initiative. It's a lot of John Cotter in there too.
Yeah.
But it's a program, it's a change management program for volunteer programs, basically. That some of our organizations have been through, but it's very interesting. But yeah, a lot of it's all about change management and who to go to and who's your ally and who's on your side and who's going to make it happen and all that. But yeah, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. And I do encourage anyone to reach out to Laura. And thank you again, Laura. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you and your face anyway.
Say your volunteer change management program one more time.
Service Enterprise Initiative.
And what is that exactly? Is that a statewide initiative or an association?
It
you-
is actually a program that was created by Points of Light. And they have these hubs, basically, like United Way of Southern Arizona was a hub here that delivered the training and stuff to nonprofits. Myself and a few other folks were trainers, helped train, and were mentors and stuff to some of the organizations. And then it's in Phoenix. I mean, it's really across wherever, but it's really just about creating these change management and utilizing skilled volunteers. It's like this whole thing. It's for you, it wouldn't be boring. For others to listen to, they're like, what? But I would encourage any nonprofit or anyone that utilizes volunteers to go through the program. So,
So is the essence of that to better utilize your volunteers as real assets?
pretty much, yeah, to utilize skilled volunteers, but technically, I mean, typically, there's all these, I don't want to call them issues, but issues surrounding, volunteer programs and, getting to change the culture and stuff like that. There's a question in there, service enterprise initiative, sorry.
Service Enterprise Initiative.
Yeah, and so you're basically just trying to change the culture. Like, volunteers are awesome. They can do so much for us. They can increase our capacity. They, help us with our mission. But yeah, you can Google it and find out a little bit more. And then right now the ASU is, I think, the hub right now.
Oh,
I can't think of their name of the part of the school all of a sudden, but I think they kind of took over through the governor's office of youth, faith, and family in Phoenix.
okay.
But yeah, it's a very interesting program. I'm happy to send you information on it if you want it.
Yes, I would love to. That's super. That's really interesting. And I'm talking at more you coaching up, right, into your organization. And as I am the marketing person for the town of Marana, I often don't have the lighting I need for my Zoom meetings, or I run out of business cards. So I'm like the cobbler's children go barefoot. So you are the volunteer managers, and I'll bet sometimes you're so exhausted from dealing with that population that you don't feel like dealing with your population in your organization too. So sometimes
We're the middlemen.
yeah, you're in the middle. You're right where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
And-
definitely.
So that's where leadership and change management studies can help to give you ideas with your own habits as well, about you yourself in your organization. You're deploying your skills all the time, no doubt, in extremely competent ways. Since Tucson has so many nonprofits that are really exceptional in what they deliver. So
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you again. And we really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So much.
Have a great weekend.